difference when it comes to enacting laws in New Jersey. I'm Jill Horner. This is Comcast Local Edition. With me this hour is New Jersey State Senator Jeff Andrew of the 1st Legislative District. Thanks so much for being with us.
It's great to be with you.
Many of us have ideas about government and we think we should change things, but some people really come to you and other elected officials with ideas that can really have an impact that are turned into law.
Exactly, and the process really does work, and I think folks don't realize that sometimes they actually do have that availability and that potential to make that impact, to make a difference, to make a change. Okay,
let's talk about one piece of legislation that was turned into law that actually led to someone being your running mate as well.
Exactly, which is really interesting. I met Nelson Albano, who's now an assemblyman, and he came to me. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy when he lost his son to a drunken driver, and it had been a drunken driver that had been a repeat offender. Hadn't done it once or twice, but it was over and over and over again, and was out on the road again. And Nelson came to me with his family and said, you know, there's something really should be done about this. There is a point where somebody should be taken off the streets when they've been repeating so many times, be put away, given a chance, number one, to dry out, secondly, hopefully to be rehabilitated, but thirdly, also to learn a punishment, that for 6 months, they're just not going to be out in the street. And this isn't for somebody that made just one mistake. This is repeated mistakes. And of course, we worked on the bill together and going through the process, and I took him through the Assembly and through the Senate and the governor signing it. And it was a very, very good learning experience for Nelson at the time. But it also showed him how much he really wanted to get involved in the political process. And when I was running in the future and needed a running mate, I actually went to Nelson and said, I know this is going to sound crazy to you, but you had so much commitment to this issue. Imagine how many other ways you could help and make a difference. I asked him to run. He did. He actually became a state legislator as well. So again, you can make a difference. Not only did he get a law enacted, but also became a legislator himself.
And another piece of legislation that we've talked about in the past, which is now a law, which has actually been put into effect at this point, there have been some burials, it's the cremains bill. Talk to us a little bit about how the public, veterans groups came to you about something that was occurring with the remains of some veterans.
Exactly. A gentleman who's a commander of a VFW, Fred Vineyard, and some others came to me and said, you know, we really need to do something about this issue. There are veterans that, you know, it's a shame to say, but have no family at all, are unclaimed after they passed away. Nobody really is there for them. They're cremated, and some of them just ended up being on the back shelves of crematories or in the back shelves of funeral parlors or nursing homes or wherever, with nobody caring and giving them a proper military funeral. And Fred made me aware of this, and it really became a larger issue throughout the state, and indeed it's become an issue throughout the country. And because of Fred's information to me, I, along with Assemblyman Connors on the Assembly side, I sponsored legislation that said when any bona fide organization, VFW, American Legion, Vietnam veterans, whatever the group is, if they come along and they want to claim these remains and give them a proper funeral, they can. It's so appropriate. You know, we had veterans that were back to World War I that were sitting on a back shelf somewhere. How wrong is that when we say we have a commitment to veterans?
And some of these veterans have actually been buried at Doyle Cemetery and other veterans cemeteries.
Now it's law, and they can be buried properly, and they are being as we speak.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about something else related to veterans, and I know that some of them came to you as well about this, and other constituents, about American flags.
American flags. A gentleman came to me who was a veteran and said, you know, how wrong it was. He was in a government office, happened to look at the flag. Flag wasn't made in the United States of America. So, make a long story short, we passed a law that says at least in state government, in the State House, and by the way, I found one in the State House at the time that wasn't made in the United States of America as well. If you have a flag and it's flying or in position in our State House in the state of New Jersey, it has to be an American flag or a New Jersey flag that was made in the United States of America. Again, that veteran made that difference.
We just have a short time left, but the bottom line with these pieces of legislation that have now become law, and there are others as well, is that the public can make a difference. If you have an idea, if you think you can change things, you may have that option.
Absolutely, you do have the option, and you have to be persistent. You know, the difference between success and failure is persistence.
All right, thanks so much. We've been talking with New Jersey State Senator Jeff Andrew. I'm Jill Horner. the public can have input in the legislative process. I'm Jill Horner. This is Comcast Local Edition. With me this hour is New Jersey State Senator Jeff Andrew of the 1st Legislative District. Thanks so much for being with us.
Jill, it's always a pleasure.
We're talking about ideas that have become law or are pending pieces of legislation that have come to you and other elected officials from the public. Ideas that come from constituents, people concerned about different issues. I want to first start with Skinner's Law. This is a piece of legislation now signed into law. Talk to us a little bit about how this idea came to you and how it relates to drunk drivers.
It was a sad story, and actually Lisa Miles came into my office, who was Larry Skinner's daughter. And Lisa told me the story, which I had read about many times in the paper, how someone driving a large tractor trailer while her father, who was in construction, was working on a bridge, hit her father and killed him, ultimately killed him. And the worst part of it is, I mean, it's bad enough this accident happened, but he stopped his truck ahead of where the accident happened. He jumped out, the person who perpetrated this crime, looked at what he had done, and, you know, Jill, her father was profoundly hurt. There was no doubt that he was either going to be profoundly hurt for the rest of his life or that he was going to pass away. He just looked, jumped back in the truck, and drove away. And to this day, he's at large. They haven't found him.
Okay, so that's one instance of where this can relate to hit and run drivers.
Correct.
But does it relate to penalties? Obviously, this is a horrific story, but not every hit and run incident is that tragic.
Correct. And so what we did was a specific piece of legislation that said if it's a hit and run and you've done that kind of profound hurt to a human being, that kind of damage where you've possibly killed them or permanently disfigured them, something that's a very serious nature. Not when you scrape, not that you should hit and run and scrape a car either, but not when you scrape a car or have a fender bender or whatever, but something very serious, life and death like this, and you leave the scene of a crime, which could cost somebody their life, that those penalties went now to a second-degree crime, that they were increased significantly. And again, Lisa and I worked together. We fashioned the legislation together. I took her through the Assembly, took her through the Senate, where the governor signed it, went through the entire process. She went through step by step with me. It was her inspiration and her pain that made this a law in the state of New Jersey, so that if someone ever thinks of doing this again, the penalties to that person is going to be greatly increased. And it was named in honor of her dad, Skinner's Law, so that he would always be remembered and her good work would be remembered. You know, you have to truly admire people when they've gone through tremendous tragedy on their own, but rather than just be sad, which you can't help but be sad and be hurt, that you want to make it better for other human beings in the future. And that's what she did.
Let's move over to a different law at this point, and it relates to a different kind of struggle, and that's learning how to learning to read and to overcome some learning challenges. And there's now a disabilities reading task force. How did this come about?
It became through the Ravelli family, and Assemblyman Albano and Milam on the Assembly side, and I worked on the Senate side. The Ravellis, young Sammy Ravelli, Samantha Ravelli, had dyslexia, wasn't able to read at all, got the right program finally in school, the right way to do it, and now she's an honor student and a cheerleader and doing wonderfully. The point of all this is that you don't necessarily just have to spend more money in education. You have to spend it the right way and make sure that your child is getting the right type of program if they have some type of a disability. That's not always happening in the state or in the country. This task force is now being put together and is going to accomplish the goal of making sure that there's better diagnosis so that kids get the help that they need. It's not just the amount of resources that you have, but using those resources properly. Without their advocacy, you know, they took care of themselves, but Sammy also went through the whole process. She sat in the legislature next to me. They really fought to make this better, and they did.
We just have a few seconds left, but some other pieces of legislation that are pending at this point. There's an anti-freeze bill, Chloe and Samantha's law related to death and injury of heavy televisions, and Anna's law, which involves trying minors as adults, are all pieces of legislation that came to you from the public.
And there's more, and I'm so glad that people do come to me with ideas, because